This is the fourth week that we have encountered Jesus in the gospel talking about bread. I am the bread of life. Those who eat this bread will have life forever. And I have noted before that after a while this makes both congregations and preachers absolutely nuts, having to go over the same ground week after week. And my way of dealing with it has been to use the outline of the first intentional communion teaching that I do for the second graders. And I want you to hear my little recap and then what we're going to do today in the light of abundance and scarcity. This is really true when you hear what the disciples who are following Jesus are confronted with. Can they absolutely believe that the abundance of love that is represented in the bread, the abundance of all the goodness God has for them, is made available to them? This is such an earth-shattering, overwhelming idea. They can't handle it. All they can handle is the idea, well, we got enough manna in the desert, but it really got boring after a while. You can see the connection back to that. So, in your own thinking, the idea of hugeness of abundance and the ease of buying into a message of scarcity. So when we play that as a backdrop, while I use it as the second lesson, it's really the first lesson of working with the kids, that story of the difference between heaven and hell, the one that winds up with them seeing tables of food and the people with their arms locked. And the difference between heaven and hell is the hell people are angry and just not fed, and the heaven people are happy and well fed because even though their elbows are locked in heaven, they feed each other. So that is in essence of what the gospel calls us to do, to share in that abundance by making it known. Then there's the lesson of what does it mean to be prepared? First, intentional. What is it to be intentional about having communion? Intentional means to be prepared. And we go through an exercise of being prepared, but in the end, we're getting ready to say to God, I'm sorry. I did something that pulled me away from you, from this message of abundance. I fell into the trap of the message of scarcity. I got so worried. I did this and I turned away from you. If I simply stayed open to you, it's amazing. I know what, and so I'm sorry. And we do that in the general confession before we have communion. It's our way of making peace with God and making peace with each other. And then the lesson last week was the one of saying to the second graders, now you're coming of an age where we expect more from you. You may not realize this, second graders, third graders, fourth graders, but this is like your first step towards confirming the promises you've made at Holy Baptism. And so now the exercise is, against the backdrop of abundance and scarcity, we're going to talk about money. So when we talk about money, we really do start looking directly at how we buy into the message of either scarcity or embrace the joy that comes from understanding the abundance that God has given us. And the way I do that with them, 3 little banks. A larger plastic bank, 2 smaller plastic banks. The bigger bank says 80% spending, and the smaller banks say 10% savings and 10% giving. The idea of the 10% giving comes from the gleanings of the field in Leviticus, where like the 10% that was left over was to go to care for the poor and the indigent. And so their lesson is take 10 dimes, put them in the big box, but take 2 dimes out and put them in the smaller ones and learn how to do the division. And then in the end, to bring the lesson home, I give them a dollar bill that they put into the big box, and then I watch to figure out if they can continue to take 2 dimes out, figuring out that a dollar bill is 10 dimes, and they put 1 each in the smaller box. And then they have $1.60 to spend, and they leave smiling. So it's a nice early lesson that they can then bring home to get the family to understand that maybe if we were emotionally connected to breaking our budget up in such a way we'd always have enough for just in case, and we'd always have enough to care for others. But if you haven't started out that way, it's kind of tricky. Now, today's message builds on all of these, and it's how I take the story of the three baskets, the three little boxes of money, and I translate it for adults. But I need to just test something with you from all your study of psychology. You know who Eric Berne was? He was a Swiss psychologist. And he came up with something years and years ago, which you don't hear a lot about, but I think it still works very well. It's called transactional analysis. And the idea of transactional analysis is to take a look at an interaction between one person and another person and identify what voice, what type of temperament they're using when they interact with one another. So I want you to imagine, as I use my hands here, and when I edit this in the video, I'll have a separate screen that shows a graphic. So up here, think of this as a P, which means parent, and then underneath it, a little circle with an A that says adult, and underneath that, a little C that says child. And then imagine again on the other side, a P, A, and C. And the idea that happens is often you can have a conversation with somebody, but one person is acting very parental with telling you what you ought to do, and the response of the other person is to act very childish. I don't want to do that. And the goal for maturity is to find a way to both be in your adult voice, to listen carefully to one another, to resolve the issue. Can you see how in today's world that would actually be a very good thing if people started doing that on a more regular basis? So we leave that for what it is. I say that to you because I'm going to do a pun now, but I think it also works because how many of you actually keep a checkbook? This is an interesting question. 20 years ago, everybody kept a checkbook because you didn't have the little computers to look at. Now you look at your iPhone or your Android and you can check your bank balance and stuff like that. But keeping track of how you spend your money, the transactions that you spend, one of the purest ways to understand your own priorities is to take a look at your spending habits. You can see how that mirrors the idea of you buying into the message of scarcity, or are you generous in that message of abundance? And so my thought is, and I've written about this and I'm now going to share it with you, something called the transactional analysis of money. The transactional analysis of money. Did you catch the pun? You noticed the pun. Transactional analysis of money. How did you learn about money? It's a really fascinating question. Now, in my own life, I learned about money by watching my father. I grew up in an upper middle class community, Chappaqua, New York, in Westchester County. Very similar to, it just feels like here we are in Middletown. Just wonderful people. And my dad didn't have to commute to New York City. He went to the next town over. He was an executive in a corporation. He had grown up during the Depression, came out of World War II as a serving officer, had sent money home to be his nest egg to build his life. Well, when he got home, as the family story unfolds, his mother took all the money he sent home and spent it. You know, a little old car, painting the house. Dad had nothing. So Dad had to start all on his own. And here we are. He's working hard. We're in a really nice town, in a really nice house, having enough food and all the trappings that are... And he's walking around all day long going, don't have enough money. Don't have enough money. Just don't have enough money. And I'm listening to this message as a child, and I take a look around and going, well, it sure looks like we have enough money. I like this. I always want to have this kind of a lifestyle. You can see the abundance and scarcity motif floating through this. So what did I do? Well, as I got married and had a child, and I decided to use the easy credit approach to buy the lifestyle. So when it came time for me to work at age 27 in New York City, I rented a house in New Canaan, Connecticut. I could walk to the train station and go into the city. I figured out that I was the youngest person on the train who did not live at home with his parents. So I would go in and come back out. That was the beginning of a little overspending. And then within 2 or 3 years, I found myself in seminary. And that's another story. And when you're in seminary, you're not working. And then when I got out of seminary, I got a really high-paying clergy job. That's a joke. You're supposed to smile, okay? And that was the path. The second child is there of just trying to raise the family against this backdrop, trying to understand that just maybe this whole renting the lifestyle thing is gone, but I've got to climb out of the hole. And it took years. There was one period where I tried to freeze the credit cards, and it didn't work. It wasn't until my son was safely in college and my daughter was just about done that we were able, Edna Marie and I, in the year 2005, we went to a credit counselor, not because our credit was bad, but we could have gone down the slide. I needed somebody who could help me with interest rates. And that person did, but it was a holy place because that person also said, "What do you value?" I said, "Well, obviously church, because I'm a pastor." And she said, "You're not going to give up the money you give to the church. That stays. You don't change that. You keep your values straight." And then with our own discipline and some help and some blessings, within 4 years, we paid off $85,000 of unsecured debt and flipped our whole economy to the point where we were now living within our means and moving forward. And now I'm at the point, as I enter into retirement, the surprise of surprises. I've attempted my best to be faithful. I've tried really hard not to allow the message of scarcity to pull me into the message of trying to be successful, because they bang up and push you into the wrong directions. And somehow the retirement is assured, partly because of your willingness to support the church, which meant you also supported the church pension fund. So I am very grateful for that. What I'm trying to say is, I learned about money and handled it as if I was a child. When I began to move into understanding it as an adult, and I put away childish thoughts, Paul writes about this, and I realized the true responsibility of what it took to do it, and I looked carefully at the messages that had been given to me, scarcity or abundance. When I began to embrace the message of abundance, which was also the message of what is enough. The message of scarcity never allows you to consider what is enough, because there's never enough. But when I could figure out what is enough, which is a loving relationship, a roof over my head, the ability to be in relationship with others, to go out and serve and feed the hungry, if you will. You think about the various aspects of it, which is truly living as an adult. Then all of a sudden, my transactions made a lot of sense. This is what the followers of Jesus who fell away couldn't wrap their heads around. Jesus was offering them an invitation into an abundant life. He said, "I came that they might have life and have it in abundance." And he's saying to them, abundance means you get everything in life, even the bad stuff. But the abundance and the promise I make to you is, I will be part of all of it if you but recognize that I am there. And guess what? That will be enough. All these words I offer in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.